lot of chatter on the Discord about last week's episode, Brad.
Oh, yeah. I guess that could be good or bad, but I'll choose to believe that it's good. Go on.
It's good. No, it was good. People were sharing all of their tasks, like their commonly used tools. A bunch of good ones in that
Yes.
chat. We might have to do a follow up with that stuff.
There's one in particular. It might be out of scope for a cold open, but there was one I was introduced to in particular in there that I flipped my shit about. I haven't tried it yet.
Okay.
Should I get into it?
No. We'll save it. We'll talk about the QA next week or week after. But the other thing, it wasn't just apps talk. People also had some strong feelings about your American cheese position.
Oh God, that's right. It was like half cheese discussion.
Yeah, like real strong cheese talk. And the thing I realized that we didn't talk about when we were talking about your reluctance to your dislike of American cheese is that you can Americanize pretty much any cheese.
Okay, maybe we should take a step back here and can you just delineate what the nature and process of American cheese is? Like, it's not. Yeah. I've understood it to not be normal cheese. Like, it's some kind of cheese product.
Yeah, they call it a cheese product or a cheese food, but basically what they do is they reduce the cheese to powder to just get the cheesiness. They take all the liquid out, and then they reconstitute the powder into a brick that gets sliced with a wire slicing machine. And then they plastic wrap each of those to add more plastic to our oceans, I assume.
Yep.
And then you put it on your burger or your grilled cheese sandwich, if you will. And
to be clear, this is not just like your Kraft Singles grocery store style. Like, this is any American cheese that you encounter, like even in a deli, has gone through this process.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, the Americanizing of cheese is just adding some special salts to it and then melting it and blending it and then pouring it into a mold. Basically, you could do it for like Gruyere, Gouda, or any. It's a specific. The things that are important is that the proteins has to have the right amount of protein.
Yeah, there was some discussion in there about additives that make the cheese meltier, and I can't remember. It was some kind of a citrate, I believe.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you exactly what you need. Mm-hmm. You need a couple of grams of sodium citrate and a little tiny bit of sodium hexametaphosphate.
Okay, right off the top of the head.
Those help emulsify. And basically what you do is you melt the cheese together with some milk and the salts, and then you take that gloopy, horrible mess, which like typically when I've done in the past, I've done it in a sous vide bag. So I'll put it in the sous vide bath, get it to the right temperature to melt. And then you take that gloopy mess and you pour it in a real good blender and blend the shit out of it while it's still really hot. And then you take that out and you pour it into a mold, and then you have a real soft, melty cheese that melts just like American cheese, but tastes like nice cheese.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, honestly, it was pointed out in there that there are quite a few. Well, I don't want to get into cheese stratification here. Okay. But there were a number of people arguing that, hey, there are better cheeses that also melt just fine, like a cheddar, for example.
So I would say that cheddar generally, cheddar is a kind of greasy melt for me. I don't like a sweaty cheddar.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Melting cheddar does produce some oil.
Yeah, but like the American cheese slice is usually like cheddar and jack melted together with your salts. So now there's two different kinds of, there's like the Kraft Deluxe American cheese, which is actually American cheese. Then there's the Kraft Singles, which I think are cheese food technically.
Yes, a cheese food product.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm sure Wisconsin has some rules about what you can and cannot call a cheese, but we live in California, so I don't think we have any of that stuff.
No,
maybe we do. Who knows? Maybe if we add sodium citrate and sodium hexametaphosphate to anything, we can Americanize it.
I'm always saying this.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Brad, I am so excited about this week's show.
So am I. I just got back from the Vintage Computer Festival, and boy, are my fingers tired.
So much typing. I am especially excited to welcome our guest this week, who also went to the Vintage Computer Festival with you.
Yes.
Steve Lin, who is a longtime friend of the show and a genuinely delightful human being. He's on the board of the Video Game History Foundation, and I think he's also the person that you and I and many of the people we know call when we have weird computer problems with old hardware that we don't exactly know what to do with, and there's no readily apparent answer.
Oh, yeah. And encyclopedic knowledge of both computers and video games from the last 40 plus years. But yeah, Steve and I both went to the Vintage Computer Festival West, the one in Mountain View, California, at the Computer History Museum. We saw a ton of cool stuff. I took a bunch of photos and videos, which I haven't worked this out yet, but look for a link somewhere that will have photos and videos so you can kind of follow along with some of the stuff we're talking about here. It was a good time.
Yeah. Welcome to the show, Steve. We're so glad to have you here. Okay. You guys went a couple weeks ago to the Vintage Computer Festival West 2024.
West. Yeah.
Well, I'm just doing the official name. I'm keeping it on the reel.
Right. Well, yeah, there's a couple other shows. So
yeah. I assume they have an East and possibly a North and South.
I was looking it up. I couldn't find a full list. There's a Southeast in Atlanta. There's a Midwest in Chicago. And by the way, you really should go check out the Midwest website. It's very era appropriate.
Okay.
Nice.
A lot of tables, frames, maybe.
Yes. No. I mean, like early 80s. Like this shouldn't even be a web page. It's like text mode looking. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's very cool.
Cool. But yeah, welcome to the show, Steve. It's good to have you here, and always nice to talk about old hardware with you.
Yeah, it's fantastic to be here. I'm excited.
Yes, and thank you for getting me out to this show. I was like waffling like a day of when I woke up on not much sleep and was just like, maybe I could just like bum around the house today, and then thankfully I went because this is frankly one of the coolest things I've ever been to.
Yeah.
So I was sad because I was planning on going on Friday, the day before. I think you ended up going, Brad, and then my wife and daughter had other plans for me that day, and then Saturday was dog surfing at the beach by my house, which basically turns the entirety of Pacifica into a parking lot for about 10 hours on Saturday. So I stayed at home and grilled hamburgers instead of going. So, but yeah, I want to hear all about it. Can I live vicariously through the two of you?
Yeah,
sure.
For sure. Before we get into this year's, I was going to ask Steve, like, how long have you been going to this? How long has it been around? Do you know?
Well, I have definitely been going pre-pandemic, but I can't remember how many years before that because I had seen some of these displays before, and so I'll have to go back. But it's at least probably 6-7 years, I think, for me.
Cool.
And yeah, you see some people come back, and then whenever there's something new, it's always let's gather around and see. And then folks that I wish would come back because they just had amazing displays.
For sure. In fact, it was looking over the exhibitor list the morning of that I was like, okay, I'm insane if I don't go to this because 15-year-old me would be jumping out of his shoes looking at even like 2 or 3 of these things, let alone 24 of them. So this is the Vintage Computer Festival West. It is at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View in California, which like the Computer History Museum is its own episode topic, like setting the VCF aside, which we'll maybe touch on at the end a little bit here. But yeah, it was a great time. Like walking into that hall, it just kind of like it's a little overwhelming the amount of hardware that was arrayed in there.
Well, I was going to ask, what's the setup? Is this like a ballroom at the Computer History Museum? Is that where they put it all, or is it in something nearby?
Yeah, it's the upstairs area where they usually hold talks and everything. And so there's the auditorium where they have actual people going through their projects. And then there's the convention space, for lack of a better term, which is the big open room. And they have basically as soon as you walk in, you see things like an IMSI 8080 and a bunch of table full of portable computers and everything else. And it's like, oh, I know what I'm walking into here. Yeah, and then you walk through the show floor and you just see the sea of all kinds of cool displays.
There was almost like overflow out in the hall going into that main exhibit room because I think the very first thing I saw was a PDP-11, like a full PDP-11 that had been condensed into like a 2U rack unit.
That guy was great.
What's a PDP-11?
PDP-11 is like, it's like the mainframe, right? Or it's one of the biggest, not biggest physically necessarily, but like most important mainframes in history. I think the PDP-11 is what the C compiler was developed on originally. Like that's what they invented the C language on, if I'm not mistaken, and Unix to a large extent.
Yeah, and it's really funny how that guy got into it. He was at Weird Stuff Warehouse, which no longer exists, and he was digging through a box and found one of the boards for the PDP-11. And I was like, I should do something with this. And then basically just kind of built the whole project around it. And he had the whole display, and it's wonderful is how something like that really spiraled into what he built.
Yeah, like seeing like that was a perfect encapsulation of what this whole show was about. It's like classic important hardware, but also like hacked into this like really impressive hobbyist project, at the same time. We should fill in the detail that the PDP-11 is like your refrigerator size classic mainframe, right? Like it was a huge, like 1,000-pound computer or something.
Yeah, and the main reason it was so big was actually the storage, right? So it was using magnetic tape and all these other things. And what he had was basically a compact flash card or an SD card in there attached to the I/O. And so you don't need the rest of it, right? And there was obviously more efficient power supplies and everything else. And so it was really cool to see, what parts of it were original and what have we made much, much smaller.
So was this stuff that like, I mean, some of this I'm sure was definitely in the no touch zone, but did he have a terminal set up that you could like log in and mess around with it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I would say that the vast majority of things were touch, please.
Yeah.
It was very much out there and like keyboards attached to everything and displays and even people there to walk you through how to use something, because there's a lot of people that's like, what am I looking at? So
yeah. I would say it was just about 100% hands-on with everything, with the exception of like there's an auction house that had some artifacts that we'll get to there, which obviously you're not going to take those out and handle a check from Apple Computer in 1976 or whatever. But like every piece of hardware there, people were very eager for you to put your hands on it and use it, and they really wanted to tell you about it.
It's run by enthusiasts, right? And there's people who are super personally passionate about this and they want to share that with you. And so you probably spend half a day just walking between two booths and getting into deep conversations with the person about their display.
Well, this is one of the things that we found it tested early on, is that when you go places like this where people are doing something because they're really passionate about it, the conversations were always good, because when people care enough to go to this like kind of like, even if you don't care about the original 8080, you're going to learn something interesting, and life is going to be better for having a conversation with the person who built a modern version of the 80. Was this a real 8080, or is this like a Raspberry Pi inside a box that has headers connected to it that gives it the input and outputs of an MSI 8080?
He had the original MSI 8080, and
okay.
Yeah.
This guy was like very classic graybeard, and I say that in the most loving way possible. Did he have suspenders on? I can't remember if he literally had suspenders. I think he did. I think he was literally wearing suspenders. He had a gray beard. I was asking him, I was telling him, I was like, oh, there's all these like Arduino based 8080 clone projects out there. Those are all I've ever seen. It's so cool to see one of these, like a real one in person. He immediately started talking about, is it DRI, Digital Research, right? Was the company that made CPM?
I think so, yeah.
Like I know this is like esoteric computer history, but he started rattling off the name of the companies that have been defunct for 45 years that made software for the 8080 as if they were still around, because he had like talked to them back in the day. Like it was very clear he had known all the people who were writing the operating systems for this stuff back then.
Okay, so I guess it's kind of a lot to talk about, but let's just start with the stuff you guys were stoked about. I see at the top of the list, it says Prodigy Reloaded.
Yeah.
I assume either you're really into Star Trek, maybe you like 90s bands, or alternately the internet's coming back in 90s form.
Yeah, but before we get into this one, I'll say real quick, they handed everybody a ticket when you checked in, because there was was it kind of a like audience choice, like fan favorite contest. Like you marked your favorite exhibit at the end and dropped it in a box. And this was my pick for the best thing at the whole show. There were like the first three exhibits we'll talk about here, I think, were our sort of like finalists for the coolest things here. And this was definitely one of them.
I love the idea of them giving you a chit to like, like everybody who comes gets a vote into what the good thing is, instead of just having like picking a bunch of people to be judges. That's cool.
I thought the idea was to hand the exhibitor the ticket that we wanted to have it to vote for. It was like it was going to be some like showing up to their booth and blessing them with your vote or something, but it was more of a secret ballot kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Agonizing decision too, because
for sure.
they were such great displays. But okay, Prodigy Reloaded. I wrote in the notes here, do we have to talk about what Prodigy was? Because I don't know if everybody knows.
I think it's worth hitting. Like in the early days before AOL, there were a handful of kind of like nationwide BBSs, basically, that also would let you pipe into the internet. CompuServe was one of them. Prodigy was one of them. Delphi was another. They all had they had kind of very 90s names when I think about it. But this was one of the early ones. I don't know anything beyond that. Like that's the extent of my knowledge about Prodigy. I didn't have an account ever.
Yeah, so I was a Prodigy subscriber, late 80s, early 90s. And the thing that really set it apart was it had a GUI, right? This was mouse driven, and it was doing vector graphics in terms of drawing. So you were getting a lot more fidelity than anything like ASCII art or whatever that you were seeing with BBSs at the time. And they had a bunch of different sections. There was a section where you could shop. And then there were the most popular thing for me were the message boards, which was like it was basically Usenet before I got access to Usenet, and then email. And so you would pay a monthly fee and you would log in, and there were all these different features. And they actually hired editorial staff. So they had, news articles and weather and everything else. So it was sort of this all-in-one portal, before that was really a thing.
How did you get access to it in the first place, Steve? Do you remember?
Yeah, so we had a PC. I want to say it was probably a 386 at the time with 2400 baud modem. And so similar to AOL, you would actually have to buy the package, and it would include the starter disk and a personal disk. And in many cases, it came with a modem because people didn't have modems. They weren't sort of widespread. And a lot of that was subsidized by Sears and I think IBM, one of their partners. So it was, hey, I can get a modem and I get this, Prodigy service for like $100 or whatever it is.
Well, and the neat thing was that they had local numbers, had local numbers in many exchanges. So anyway, it was like a community, basically community/ISP kind of thing.
Yeah. But also came out of, help me out, Steve. It was IBM.
Sears.
Who were the other? Sears. IBM, Sears, and I think one other company, right?
Yeah, I can't remember who the other one was off the top of my head.
But like very corporate backed, like very, very much like big capital venture kind of thing. Yeah. Not grassroots.
I assume that there were people in suits standing around a presentation at some point saying the internet, eh? Before the internet,
like
right?
The online service or whatever it was. Yeah. And if you look at screenshots of Prodigy, it has a very distinct look because, like I said, a lot of the images are done via vector, right? And so I even remember, since I was on a 2400 baud modem, I could see it being drawn when I would go to different sections, and so it would draw like the background and then sort of foreground. And then for me, it was obviously the sharing messages about what the latest PC Engine game or something was, and just diving in there.
CBS was the third partner.
Okay.
Just FYI, Brad, you should know
Makes
that.
sense.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So anyway, the service no longer exists, right? It was shut down. And this guy, Phil Heller, was working actually on a Quantum Link restoration, which was the precursor to AOL, and then heard about someone who started doing something with Prodigy, and then dove in like headfirst into basically restoring Prodigy using data that we had.
Right. So that was this thing just becomes progressively more jaw dropping as you drop more facts about what he's having to go through to restore this thing. So correct me if I've got any of this wrong, but a lot of the assets he's harvesting are out of like cache files from the original clients, right? Like people that still had the client installed from 35 years ago, right?
Yeah, so it comes off the hard drive directories. There's a stage.dat and personal.dat files that basically hold all the information of the things that you viewed on Prodigy. And so he got the sort of unmodified disks and then was getting the data from other people.
Right.
And he's still looking for them. So he's got a Discord server, and you can drop in additional files for him to dig through and see if it's something he has or not. But it's the never ending hunt.
Yeah. Like it's such an amazing idea that he's basically assembling this patchwork of just whatever people browsed back in the day. Like that's the bulk of what he's got access to. Just kind of everybody's personal experience being rolled up into this collection.
It's like, it sounds like he's trying to figure out what the statue looked like by looking at the shadow it casts at different times of day.
Yes.
This is bonkers.
Very, very much so. If I understood some of this stuff, like some of the vector images he's having to like retrace over to reproduce. Is that correct? And he's doing it in, I think he said like the original DOS Paint program.
Yeah.
Or a very similar one.
I mean, it's kind of like doing the onion skin animation, right? He can kind of see what the outline looks like of the original, and then he just redraws it using the original tools. And he had mentioned that he reverse engineered some of the tools to generate the files, and then he ended up getting access to the originals, and his were incredibly accurate, which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, what he, if I understood that stuff correctly, like the Prodigy, the programs that ran on Prodigy ran in some kind of like virtual machine. You know, they did kind of a like write once, run anywhere sort of thing, so it could run on different types of computers. He reverse engineered that stuff and like wrote his own compiler, I believe.
Yeah.
And then he was basically comparing those binary files that he had compiled himself, and they were basically identical. So he was very proud of his reverse engineering effort.
So what's the like? Is this something that you can go look at now, or is still in progress? Like, how far along is he? I guess are they? I guess.
Yeah, he's got like a demo client, I think, an experience that you can pop open. I think that I'm actually not sure of what the level of access is. For me, it's really just you walk up to the terminal and it is like you walked back in time, right? It's like I was doing like keyboard shortcuts and going to places. He's like, oh, you're looking for this. You're just remembering the name wrong. I'm like, oh, wow, that's you're right. And I like loaded up the game and I started playing the game, and it was just a wonderful experience.
Was Prodigy a pay per hour, like a timed connection thing? It was,
so
right?
It was monthly.
Okay.
And the funny thing, and this is what really dates it. So it was a monthly fee. And then after a while, they started limiting the number of emails you could send a month to 30. And any additional email was 25 cents. And so imagine paying 25 cents per email message. And so my friends and I, what we would do is we would create an account, and we would just send messages to an address that didn't exist, and it would bounce back to you. And so and it wouldn't charge you. And so we basically had unlimited messages through this sort of hack of the Prodigy service. And yeah, I very distinctly remember doing that in the early 90s, I think.
That's really funny.
Yeah, this thing was a real trip. I don't know what news feed he was hooked into. I think he might have explained to you, Steve. I don't know if I caught what he was doing there, but he had you go to headlines at one point, and it was pulling up current, up to the minute headlines about the 2024 election in this old Prodigy client. I don't know how he was getting that stuff in there.
I think it was just a regular RSS feed, and it was just rendering it in the client. But yeah, it was like, hey, these are the actual temperatures right now, you know, the weather report. And you know, because the map was being drawn differently, they actually had to sort of transform the data so that it was showing the correct temperature above the correct area because of the difference in the way the map was drawn. And so you think, oh, that's real simple. You just overlay. It's like, well, not really, because here's how the data doesn't match with what Prodigy expects.
Yeah, and like Prodigy was early 90s, right? So did we? I guess we had GPS in the 80s, but not for consumers, and not like. Okay, yeah, this is just such a weird time for computers when this thing was happening. So a lot of times when people do restorations of these big projects, like, for example, when people made City of Heroes work again, someone on the inside had leaked a giant data file for them. Has that ever happened with Prodigy, or not so much?
Go ahead, Brad. You talk to him about this.
I was waiting to see if you said anything, because I assume he's okay talking about this stuff.
Yeah,
he didn't say it was like under, keep it under your hat or anything.
No.
He said he has spoken to a former Prodigy employee in the last handful of years who had taken a full backup of the service, which was about 2.5 terabytes. And again, that's 2.5 terabytes in like late 80s data. So quite a lot.
Yeah, 2.5 terabytes even in the mid 90s was a ton, right?
Right.
Like that's a lot of data.
So conclusion to that story is this former employee had just deleted that backup like a couple of years before
he said months. I think it was like 2 or 3 months.
Oh my God.
From when he reached him, and he's like, oh no, I'm sorry, I just deleted that. And Brad, I think you said, like, how can you manage to go on after hearing something
seriously,
like that?
That's so demoralizing to come that close to just getting the Holy Grail. Like, I don't even know how you can continue. But he flat out said, this is like maybe one of the most noble things I have ever heard. He said, I will work on this project for the rest of my life. Like, he flat out just said, like, this is like the work of a lifetime, basically, and I'm just going to keep going with it. He said he's confident that there are other backups out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of patents that were related to the development of Prodigy and actual litigation that had occurred. And so his thought was, in some legal, like, law office, like vault or whatever, is a backup of this because they needed it for the litigation. And so I think that was for him the He's like, I'm pretty confident it's there. I just need someone to leak it out. And that will obviously be a big shot in the arm to the project.
Cool.
Yeah. It was just, a lot of passion projects on display at this festival, but this one was just above and beyond in terms of the amount of work going into it.
You said he has a Discord. I assume there's a website someplace too.
Yeah. Prodigyreloaded.com. I'll put links to a bunch of the projects and stuff in the show notes for this one.
And I bet he's
Discord server for sure.
Yeah, and I like you said, he's collecting stage.dat or personal.dat files if you have your old computers around and we're on Prodigy 30 years ago.
That's so crazy to me because we're not talking about install disks that you might still have for the client, right? Like, you need to still have the install directory from an original hard drive. Like, never have wiped an old hard drive that still has an old DOS install or something on it.
Well, so one of the things he mentioned was that there was actually a disk only install. And so you would boot with the disk and then you would swap it out for a personal disk. And it came with a label to label a floppy with personal disk. Okay. And then that will have the personal.dat file. And so he'll just like cruise auction sites for floppy disks and see if he can spot that label. For personal, and we'll buy the lot because he's looking for whatever's on that disc.
Oh man, that is incredible. That's some of the coolest digital archaeology I think I have ever heard.
I don't think I ever used a modem in the pre-Windows days. So this is incredible. It's very cool.
Yeah.
What else did you all see? What else was neat?
Well, right across the hall, right from this guy.
Literally like right across from this guy.
Yeah. Open source CRT. And I think that we've talked for a long time about how no one's going to make CRTs again. And this guy is open sourcing a part of it. I don't know, should I go into Steve describes how a CRT works?
That might be helpful in basic terms. I certainly didn't understand a lot of the ins and outs of what he was showing off.
Yeah. So there's kind of four main parts of a CRT. There's the glass tube itself. That sort of Hershey Kiss looking thing. There's the yoke, which is a lot of the wound magnets and everything that goes around the neck of it. There's the neck board, which is the interface to the chassis, which is what the open source CRT project is basically this universal chassis and neck board that if you have a tube and a yoke and you have the right number of neck pins, you could theoretically drive any tube that you can find. And so this, when we talk about the arcade world, that was what this was originally designed for, is because they have like a Pac-Man maze burnt into the screen, right? Or certain colors have completely disappeared because there's oxidation on the cathode side. And when we talk about preserving arcade machines, the biggest problem was you had to find the right tube to fit the arcade chassis. And so there's like lists of like these consumer TVs used a tube that's, compatible with a K7000 chassis, which is one of the arcade chassis. And what he's doing is kind of removing that from the equation. So if you can find a tube, a TV that's sitting on the sidewalk or recycling or whatever, you could theoretically connect it to this chassis and start driving it. Just like you would. And so it really opens up the possibility for a lot of these tubes that might have like dead or weird chassis or whatever to sort of bring them back to life.
So when you say it's burned in,
yeah,
you can replace the hardware in the back and that'll fix the burn in. I thought that was on the phosphor side on the inside of the tube.
Oh, sorry. So you're replacing the tube.
So, okay.
Yeah. So basically it's like, okay, I've got a tube with burn in, or it's it's lost. It hasn't been rejuvenated, whatever it is. You can actually just yank that out, and as long as you can find a tube. In fact, his demo was running off an RV TV that he found on the sidewalk, and so he just like pulled that TV off and built like a clear case to kind of demonstrate what it could do. And so it was just super cool. Like this really changes the game.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that case was. The case was kind of like clear laser cut acrylic, I guess, or something along those lines. It was basically just a clear plastic looking box that you could see all the components in. I did ask him I asked him what is the potential for degradation on tubes other than burn in, and he said not much. I think there was like maybe one other thing that can happen, but the point is like he made it sound like the tubes are relatively durable. So as long as, like you said, as long as you can get a good tube, you can kind of put the rest of the contraption together and have a working CRT.
Yeah, there can be oxidation that can occur on the cathode side. And there's a thing like a rejuvenator that basically just shoves a ton of voltage in there and kind of burns it off. But of course, that you're burning off layers of the sort of heavy metals and everything that make it work. So that you kind of do that in your end of life of a tube. But because most TVs aren't on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like in an arcade, this really allows you to take, those discarded tubes, or, the folks are like, oh, I'm moving to a flat screen or whatever. You can pull out those tubes and now you can drive them without the original chassis. And so you can put all kinds of different signals and everything into it.
So is there anything on a tube on the way the phosphors are applied to the tube or anything that limits the resolution? Is this going to change the resolution of are you going to be able to take a standard def TV tube and make it a better resolution than you would have had before? Or is that relatively fixed?
No, it'll be the same resolution. Basically it'll just make it do what it did before. Right. Okay. And so, and so he was saying, like, I think on that RV monitor, the dot pitch was really high. So he's like, hey, you can kind of see where it's a little chunky, but it basically acts like, I don't care what tube you're throwing at me. I should be able to throw a picture up.
And I know that there's a lot of, I don't know what the right term is, but my understanding is that in the manufacture of CRTs, there's a lot of kind of like lost knowledge that went when the last of those factories shut down, because even though we'd been making CRTs for 50 or 60, 70 years, by the time we stopped making them, like there was a lot of kind of handed down oral tradition of how to make these things work. Does this help with that, or is that more on the tube and kind of phosphor application side?
Yeah, that's more on the tube. And I think the biggest thing, like in my mind, there's no sort of scalable practical reason to make those glass tubes again. And it's not just sort of the process of the glass, but there's a lot of heavy metals like barium and a couple other things in the creation of that tube. And so I don't see how it could ever be cost effective for someone to spin up like a CRT, a tube factory. And so what this is doing is basically whatever tubes exist out in the universe, we could potentially keep those running and kind of have that CRT glow for at least within our lifetimes. Right.
That's cool. And make it more flexible, like you said, and more efficient, I guess. I think, Steve, you can speak to the detail a lot better than I can here, but there are some parts of the design here that he said are more efficient than they would have been. I mean, go figure, of course, things get more efficient over time, but he was talking about certain like electrical components in there that are just much, I guess, less power hungry or less hot or smaller, all of the above. That he's been able to improve on.
It's a lot of all of the above. I think it's what he described specifically was the horizontal deflection. And so that's when it gets to the end, like drawing that sort of Dex line. And a lot of that's done with capacitors, but he's using, I think, a silicon carbide MOSFET, which is a lot more efficient and a lot more, it doesn't create as much heat, because usually there's this giant heat sink on most monitor chassis. And he's like, yeah, this is stuff that really didn't exist when CRTs were sort of mainstream, and now he's able to use this because they're using it in other applications. I think he said like model trains or something.
Yeah.
Thought this was like, okay, I'm going to start stealing that part and just make this more bulletproof than it was before.
Yeah, that's an awesome project that's going to hopefully keep CRTs viable for as long as people who care about CRTs are around.
I mean, yeah, he's looking for people with like, hey, I have wonky tube, like what's going on here? Because he has circuitry on the chassis, he can output the data and he had it like on a tablet. And so he can make adjustments sort of in real time on a touch screen.
Yeah.
To, change the voltage, change color, all these things that you could never do before. But he can because of digital technology. So it's super cool.
Tune for the yoke and the tube that you connect it to.
Correct.
Neat.
Yeah.
So how difficult is this? Like, this seems like a fairly intense process for somebody who doesn't know what they're like. Would you recommend that Brad and I try this? Would you recommend you try this? Or is this like, take it to the expert and like go from there?
I mean, I could do it. Like nothing in here seems, insurmountable in terms of putting this together. Nobody's sort of making prefab boards based off it's open source, right? So everything is available on GitHub. And so you could start like running a run of PCBs. And yeah, if you have the motivation, you can solder one together. And it's just finding the donor tubes. So, and those are everywhere. I literally found a TV on the street a couple of weeks ago that I fixed. And just the stuff like that this can really help with.
That's such a good TV too. Such a good find when you showed me those pictures. It's like what brand is it? It's a 14-inch with component on it.
Yeah, it's a 14-inch Toshiba CRT with component and S-Video, and it's a very nice small TV.
Yeah, that's fabulous. That's really cool. Does it? He has a site for this as well, or not so much?
I couldn't find much of like a presence for him. Like there's a retro RGB interview with him about this project from a couple years ago that I put in the show notes. He does have the GitHub repo, but that's pretty much just designs and stuff. So
yeah,
okay.
There's not much of an online. I mean, I think he has an X account, maybe Mastodon or something. But if you look at the GitHub, is where everything lives, and then handful of interviews, but. Really cool. Love the passion once again of the project and him recognizing the need and having the ability to create something.
It's really cool. I never like it. It's funny. The MOSFET thing makes a ton of sense, but like I remember the price on those. I don't know why the price on those has gone down so much in the last 10 years, but I remember when we built the first 3D printer that we built and tested in like 2010 or 2011. They were really expensive. And then like 4 years later, we were putting drones together and you just got a big giant sack of them and they were twice the size that they were. And yeah, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's what he said. It was like, hey, this is like when he first started, it wasn't super practical, but then over the past even 5 years, the prices just plummeted. So he's able to just make it as part of the design.
Well, what else we got?
Apricot Computers.
I think you mean Apple Computers, Brad. That's right. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. They started it. They made the Apple II. They made the Apple I. It was a failure. Then the Apple II, and then on and on down the line.
Like no joke, when we hit on this exhibit, I was just like, this feels like the fake old computer brand named after a fruit from a movie. Like, how does this actually exist? And I've never heard of it. But I will say this Apricot Computers exhibit, I think, exemplified what the majority of this festival was about, which was just sort of collectors bringing a lot of cool old stuff and showing it off. You know, like the previous two projects we talked about are very hands-on, very engineering focused, a lot of custom work being done. But a lot of the stuff at this thing was very much just like, hey, I've curated like a pretty extensive or even like comprehensive collection of this one specific, very hardcore niche, and I'm going to show it to you now.
Okay.
And so, yeah, Steve, did you have any Apricot Computers experience at all? This stuff was completely new to me, and it was like looking at something out of an alternate future that never happened.
Yeah, I had never heard of it before either. And when he described, hey, this is pretty much a UK-centric computer company, it's like, oh, okay, maybe that makes sense. But I mean, these computers look like they came out of like Severance or something, right? It is, they had a design aesthetic that is very unique. And so you can look at them online. And then when you see some of the hardware that they were putting together, it just kind of blows your mind. Like, how are they doing this in 1984? Right. So the one I put in here, the Apricot FP portable. So it's a portable computer with like a 600 by 200 LCD display. It had a fold out mic and speech recognition that was from the same people who did like Dragon Naturally Speaking. Had a wireless keyboard, programmable keys, and it just, when you're like, how did this come out in 84? Like, and you think of like what its contemporaries were in the United States, it's just like mind boggling.
That's what I meant about the alternate future stuff. When you line up those bullet points of features you just rattled off, it's again, just how did this exist in a single product in the mid 80s and people still aren't talking about it every day? You know, it's crazy. The wireless keyboard was infrared, I believe he said, with like a pretty good, like a much bigger range than you could read that screen you pointed out.
Yeah. He was saying like, oh, I could be across the room and it would still pick this up, but you would never be able to look at the screen because it was, you know, it's like that era appropriate LCD screen. Right. Yeah.
One of the other models they had, I didn't make a note of the model, unfortunately, but it had the keyboard on it, had a like an LCD display with I don't know what type of it was, like a text mode kind of LCD display, you know, just like 2-line,
like a word processor almost.
Yeah, like 40 character 2-line like little display. Wow. Yeah.
And so that display had 6 buttons under it with lights on LEDs on each one, or an LED on each one. And what that display was used for was to create like macros or specific like one-touch functionality for different applications that you would run on the computer. including Windows, including like things like Windows and word processors. And they basically, Steve, do you remember what any of the Windows functionality was, for example? Like I'm trying to think of, I don't know if it was like close window, open file explorer or file manager.
Well, there were two things because a lot of these ran like CPM, right? And they had this like DOS and Windows compatibility mode. And the funny thing is that there weren't enough function keys. And so what would happen is when you went into this like Windows compatibility mode, the screen would say, oh, wait, I'm F9, F10, F11, F12, right? And so it would turn those into function keys so that you would have compatibility. Or you could, if you opened up a word processor, it would be like cut, paste, whatever. And that was on the keyboard.
It's crazy. I think he said there was a TSR that ran, right? A terminate and stay resident, which I guess, can we describe that as sort of a primitive form of system service, I guess, that runs in the background?
Pretty much. It ran on boot, right?
And so the CSR would detect which application you were in and tailor the macros on those programmable keys to whatever you were running. And he showed us, it's like, hey, I launch Windows now, and you would watch the functions on those programmable keys change, update on the LCD in real time. And again, this is a mid 80s computer.
Yeah, it was great.
This is bonkers. This is at the time when like the office that I was like, people were using like shared terminal workstations at this point, right? Like it was the PC was relatively new. Were these just crazy expensive? Is that why they didn't take off, or did you get I guess they don't have prices on the cards, so I don't know.
So they were actually quite expensive, and I think the other thing that he's a big collector, and he admitted this. He's like, it's more form over function. Some of these things are beautiful, and the keyboards look amazing, but actually using them is quite painful. And so I think that once again, it is the design aesthetic is amazing, but when you actually stick your hands on it and try to use it as a computer, you run into these issues. And it also sounds like they were really heavily focused on the business market, right? And so this is like Office and things like that. So it wouldn't have seen much consumer penetration. I think you were looking at like ZX Spectrums and Sinclair and stuff like that for the home market at this time, Commodore, things like that.
What's up? What was the next stop on this tour of? Let me guess. We're going to go back to mainframe days.
Not quite mainframe. That was more in the actual museum downstairs, which we'll get to. But I guess we are like walking through it chronologically with the exhibits we saw in the room, because like straight past the apricot stuff was the sort of farm of big iron workstation type computers like giant SGIs and Sun machines like Spark stations and some HP Unix machines, kind of doing all kinds of stuff in there. I'm not sure you want to start with that giant SGI. That was like an SGI Power series, I believe.
Yeah, so actually, we didn't notice it at first because it was so big, and that sounds strange to say, but it was like kind of like an end table, just this giant brick, and there was like a screen on top and a keyboard, and so at first your mind processes it as, oh, this is like a table or something, and then you take a closer look and realize it's this enormous SGI workstation that's probably 2 by 3 by 2 or something like that. Or, I mean, it's just. And it was just sitting on the floor.
It looks like a filing cabinet. It's so big.
I've got a bunch of photos and videos I'll try to post along with this episode so people can look at some of this stuff. But yeah, we did 2 circuits around the exhibit room, and we literally didn't catch the existence of this machine until the second loop through the room, because like you said, it was so comically big that your brain would just write it off as a table or something. Yeah. That was a 1992 one, I believe he said.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I don't know what those specific. This is like the 2 pedestal tower, I believe.
It's called the Twin Towers, what the card says in the photo gallery. Yeah.
So like 91, 92 is like very directly like pre-Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
And I don't. So like you definitely in that era, you really start to think about like, okay, there were not that many of these machines made. I mean, there were quite a few of them, but still. And especially being in the Bay Area, like what piece of history did this particular workstation maybe contribute to? It's hard to say. I mean, obviously we'll never know, but it's super cool.
I was doing a render of like a jet or something. And so you can see, okay, your mind starts going, it's probably a military contractor or somebody that had this. But then we got to Brad, what you were always looking for is the Spark stations.
Yes. Yeah. I think I've talked about it before. At my university, when I was there in the late 90s, our computer labs were full of Spark Station 2s, I want to say, which was Sun's like, I guess lower end, like they're sort of like 2 pizza boxes stacked on top of each other. desktop machines. They're kind of lower end workstations. And yeah, they had a number of them there. We got into quite a conversation with a guy who, like, he took us into the back room, actually. He could tell when I was like, I've thought about buying a Spark station here and there. And he's like, oh, I've got one open back here if you want to come look at it. And cue about, I don't know, 20 minutes of watching him bang on the CD-ROM and the boot program. Because if you can go try to boot like Solaris or Sun OS, the Sun's version of Unix from the era, like a VM of it, you can just find one, like a web hosted VM of that thing. It doesn't even take you into like the actual user interface. You get to like Open Boot, which is the sort of PROM boot environment where you have to like kind of bootstrap the hardware to make it boot from this other command line with its own totally different set of commands. And he spent like 10 minutes in there banging on that stuff. Just like
literally whacking it with like screwdrivers and stuff.
I think did he do any actual whacking?
He was fiddling around with one of the SCSI cables or something, but it wasn't just him. It was another guy, and it's not like these people didn't know what they were doing, right? They were clearly enthusiasts, and almost every sentence of his was telling us not to buy it. Yeah, he's just like, oh, this stupid mouse. You have to have the special mouse pad that's reflective, and the monitor needs the special box. And then, they were kind of bantering back and forth because they were trying to get like the drive to mount. And he's like, maybe try this. He's like, I already tried that, right? And so everything we saw was this demonstration of, okay, I like that this exists. I do not need this in my house.
Yes, very much. Like it was very much. It was like, okay, unless you want to devote basically all of your free time to this project, you're probably not even going to get this thing to boot. So I was happy to just see some up close and then move on with my life.
Yeah.
So this is growth, Brad. That's good.
Yes.
This is getting in this kind of collection is a path of sadness and infamy.
But I mean, that's the great thing about this event, though. There's a bunch of wish fulfillment built in for people who are huge nerds about old computer stuff. So you can go see a bunch of stuff you've always marveled at and then walk away. Just like wipe your hands and walk away.
You could stop it in and out of the way home, have a nice burger, and not think about it for another year.
I didn't realize until I looked at the exhibitor list right before we recorded here that there was an actual SimCity exhibit attached to this area. I thought it was just a weird coincidence that a bunch of these different old Unix machines were all running SimCity. Mm-hmm. Also, I don't know if you guys have opinions on how to pronounce old versions of Unix. IRIX or IRIX for SGI?
I always said IRIX, but...
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we always said IRIX, but we were in Tennessee, and it's entirely possible that every single person I talked to that worked on those machines had never heard anybody else pronounce it. So
Right. I had only read it in magazines. Like the Hewlett-Packard Unix, like HPUX. I don't know if that's how people say that. Anyway, the point is they had a lot of old Unix hardware from a lot of these big iron companies, and they were all running SimCity. Because apparently SimCity got ported to like every version of Unix back in the day.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
it was great. And it's like separate windows and stuff. So you had like, all the resources in a window, and you can drag them around and all kinds of stuff. So it was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, like that big SGI machine, but all these smaller ones as well, like seeing that level of GUI functionality from an early 90s computer was really fun. Because if you think about the types of computers you were using at home in the early 90s, that level of GUI and interoperability and multitasking was just a pipe dream.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like 20-inch monitors and higher resolutions and things like that just really weren't consumer level. I mean, I remember the first time I got a 17-inch monitor, and I thought it was the largest monitor I'd ever seen. And so these were already like way bigger than that.
Yeah, I same. I went from like a 13-inch, and I got a 17-inch Hitachi because they were on sale someplace, and I was like, oh, this is the best day of my life. It's incredible.
0.42 dot pitch. Look out.
Yeah, exactly. I can go all the way up to 1280 by 1024. Let's see. I think we have a speed run now. You want to speed run some stuff? Some high points?
The speed dating segment of Vintage Computer Festival.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is like the front of the magazine where the articles are short. So
yes.
Do we get $1 per word?
No. This is look. It's you may be talking about computers from the 90s, but we're not paying 90s rates, Steve. Sorry,
man. All right.
This was kind of scattered around the exhibit area, some in the swap meet area, and then even down in the actual museum proper. I saw some of these as well. There were a lot of these, like, I guess they must be 60s era. They're very mid-century, like Jetsons retro futuristic styling serial terminals.
Yep.
And forgive me, I don't know. I think they're like RS-232 serial connections, like that very common connector. Like, I don't know all the terminology here. I don't know if this is like from the kind of VT220 era or something, but it's monitor and keyboard units that are just terminals, right? They just plug into a thing that feeds them. There's no computer in there. I have that same type of serial connection coming out of my NAS as we speak. And some of these things were for sale in the swap meet.
Oh my God, Brad.
Unfortunately, they were a bit expensive. I think the ones I saw were $250, something like that for the couple that I saw on sale. But this is going on my list. If I have a basement someday, I need to get my hands on one of these things and make it the console for my home server.
My understanding is that dumb terminals are the future of computing. And I think you're investing in the future if you buy this.
Yeah. What was it? The Sun Ray? Was that the little tiny
little
thing,
tiny it was a itsy bitsy little you could run 20 of those on one Spark station or whatever it was.
So actually we're kind of walking around there was a Telebit Trailblazer modem, which was, Hayes and everybody else is trying to get 2400 baud modems into consumers' hands, right? And so they're using the cheapest parts. This, I think, came out of the need for people who are trying to run Usenet nodes to transfer data as quickly as possible from one to another. And so they basically threw hardware at it. So adding a lot more processing power to the modem itself to try to compensate for the noise in plain old, the twisted copper. And so they were hitting something like 9600 to like 12,000 baud speeds at the same time. Like most consumer modems are like 300 to 1200 baud. And so this was it was really cool, especially when you looked at the difference in the modems. It was just like so much hardware packed into this PCB. So it was great.
Yeah, for sure.
And this would have been like late 80s, like post acoustic coupler, probably, but mid 80s.
Maybe?
I think it's mid. Yeah, because he actually did have an acoustic coupler that was as part of the display. But it's one of those things where for a very short period of time, this was the absolute cutting edge. And then, once we started seeing things like the 56K, 32, once, people started getting better at like compression and things like that, it basically aged out and they didn't keep up with the times. And we were kind of hitting the theoretical limits on what you can do through a phone line anyway. And so it was just for a short period of time, this was the best thing you could buy. And of course you were paying for it. Right.
Yeah. He said these were very much geared toward institutions, universities or other kind of entities with money, let's say. These were not really end user focused. These were more for like big operations to connect up.
I was going to say the other fascinating concept here is that you could maintain a Usenet node on 9600 baud and it would stay in sync. Right. Like that, like the fact that you could maintain any user group at all on 96, what is it, 9.6 kilobits per second? Is that what 9600 baud is?
BPS. Yeah.
It's bits per second.
Yeah. So
divide by 8, I guess. You get bytes,
okay. So anyway, it's not very many.
Yeah. But I don't remember what year it was they lifted the restrictions on who could access the internet, but this might have been before that. Was that late 80s? That's a whole, we should do like a history of the internet episode sometime. But I think the government only lifted those restrictions in 87 maybe or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And to opening it up to everybody, right?
Yeah. So there are probably not a ton of people posting at that point. It was a simpler time.
Brad, you were pretty excited about seeing some Japanese PCs.
Yes. I pulled this straight from the exhibitor page. There was an X68000. That's the Sharp, right?
Yep.
With the kind of twin tower looking design.
Yeah.
There was a PC98. Is that NEC?
Yeah. PC98 and 88 are NEC.
Yes, an MSX2 plus a PC88 and an FM Towns, which I have been hearing the FM Towns name and seeing them in magazines going back to like the early 90s. Those were pretty legendary at the time of like 16-bit consoles. You would see these magazine features like, look at the games they're playing on computers in Japan. Some pretty legendary names there. And also those Japanese computers of that era are like probably the coolest looking computer designs of all time. Or pretty close to it if you go and Google pictures of some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, the processing power that they had available to them. I mean, the X68000 is basically like the Capcom CPS boards, right? And so their ports of Street Fighter and everything are pretty much perfect because they designed them on the X68000. And then you see all these these capabilities, but they were also super expensive. And so I find that kind of surprising because it's, given the amount of space and cost, but this was for the cutting edge of gaming, of at least, computer gaming in Japan. And they had a great display with all of them lined up, original hardware. And to Brad's point, it was very much like I remember seeing pictures of this in EGM or like Die Hard Game Fan, and then it's right in front of me, and I can do anything I want on it. So
very, very cool. Like the FM Towns has this kind of like vertical, like fold out CD-ROM tray, for example, from the front.
That's crazy.
Yeah, one of the others has a modular CD-ROM that is like, let's see, is that the
NEC? So
PC-98.
It almost looks like this tray on top of the tower. And the CD-ROM drive that fits in there is actually the same one from the PC Engine. So those are interchangeable. Yeah.
Huh. So I did not know that.
You just like swap that in. In fact, you would probably grab a TurboGrafx one and stick it in there and have, a TG16 branding on this NEC beige box.
Yeah, it was just really, really cool to see the little latching mechanism, because the CD-ROM is basically just sort of a cartridge that you slot into the top of the computer.
Was the market for these game developers? Is that who was buying these, or were they selling these to consumers too in Japan at the time, you think?
It was consumers. Yeah, these were all consumer PCs. And so, but it was, the kind of the people on the high end. And there was, if you look at the game selection, there's a ton of shooters and action games and fighting games and things, but there's also like a lot of like dating simulator, like, stuff like that wasn't super common, and they wanted to be able to shoot out the video for that. So
got it. It's also worth mentioning the X68000 has a sick handle on top between the two towers.
The pop out handle that
it's
great.
So good.
Yeah,
it's one of the coolest computers of all time, just by looks. The only thing that could have topped it is what is the red line of Japanese computers from the era? Was it Sony's MSX computers were red in a lot of cases?
Yeah, the Sony has a line of MSX systems. Like usually they're branded like Hitbit or something, and it's a very like striking like red color, either a stripe or in some cases the entire case. And that's what's cool about MSX is like it was a Microsoft standard, and so there's a lot of different manufacturers kind of with their take on it. So those were all super cool.
I just looked it up. The Sharp X1 is the other one I've got in mind. If you've seen that one, it's got a tape deck in the front of it.
I think that was the one where I played Doom. Like it was just like running Doom, and I walked up to it.
Yes.
And I just started playing the game. I was like, what am I doing? It's because it was Doom.
I had to laugh. Like you put your hands on the keyboard just because you want to interact with it. And the next thing I know is like, man, he's like kind of getting a ways into this level. That's what happens even now when you play Doom. You just start playing Doom.
Yeah, it was great.
Did you use the mouse too, Steve, or were you just
I was just keyboard doing only? Keyboards, arrow keys, not even WASD. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So RR Auctions was there, and I think we talked about this earlier, where they had a bunch of things up for auction. One of my favorite things was Bill Gates's badge, his Microsoft badge, and it's a really funny provenance story in that it was early on when they were doing RFID security on the Microsoft campus. And this was, like 20-something-year-old guy that was helping out. And Bill Gates came storming in. He's like, I can't get into my office. Right. And he's like, I want to help you, Mr. Gates. And like printed up another badge and gave him that, and then kept the original. And so that's what's up for auction.
So this is the original one. This isn't even a replacement. Wow.
Yeah. So this is the pre-RFID badge.
Well, it is an RFID badge, but apparently it didn't work. And so the one that Bill Gates carried after that would open doors. And we were kind of joking, could you like run around Microsoft campus, like getting into the catacombs with this badge? But
Brad, that badge gets you into the extreme vault, and
I think Brad, you mentioned like not being able to touch some things, and he pulled it out of the holder for me. And
did he really?
Yeah. Well, this was on Friday, and he held it out, and so I just grabbed it. And it was like flipping it around. He's like, "Okay, can I have that back now?" I'm like, "Here you go." So.
Yeah, they didn't have any kind of price ranges or like estimated value on any of these artifacts. I noticed. I guess you could maybe go look that stuff up.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was saying the badge is probably going to go for like $4,000, and like the checks and everything, 5 figures. The other weird thing, and this is where history is strange, is like sealed iPhone 1s are now going for like 5-6 figures, and sealed iPads. They had a sealed GeForce 4090 signed by the CEO. And so the sealed collector market is very strange, especially for electronics.
It's I love can we talk about the Apple check?
Yeah, they had 3 or 4 different checks. I only took a picture of a couple, but yes, there's a check signed by Stephen Jobs from March 19th, 1976 for $4.95 to Zach Electronics.
It's also worth mentioning, it's the kind of check you get when you've just opened a bank account, because it doesn't have the imprint of Apple computer.
Like the Apple
in the
computer
top left.
it's handwritten in the top left where the kind of the name and address would go.
I always thought of those as the kind of checks that like people don't take, because they like back then you would take them, I guess. But now if you roll in with they don't even bother giving you the new account checks anymore, because no one's going to accept them. So
apparently Zach Electronics still exists, assuming this is the same company.
That's funny.
A leading West Coast distributor of wire cables, connectors, and installation solution, just kind of a parts vendor, it sounds like.
Well, it was also like different eras. So it was like the $4 check, and then there was one in the middle that was like a couple $100, and then the last one's like $145,000 check. So it was like different eras of Apple.
This is a check from Google.
Google.
Can't quite tell the reflection on it. I can't quite see who the check is made out to, but yes, it's for over $145,000. Also issued by Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah,
if you remember their somewhat recent turn in the news.
But Google's doing enough that they would, when they got funded, the money would have almost certainly had to go to SVB.
Yeah. This was 99 is the date on that check. Bunch of other job stuff like his and Waz's business cards, some like Polaroids from the era around the office, some stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really cool ephemera that's coming out, and some of it you kind of, hey, this belongs in a museum. Others like, there's probably hundreds of checks, thousands of checks, right, that are out there signed. And I think one of my favorite signatures was the letter where someone asked for his autograph, and he said, "Sorry, I don't sign autographs," but then signed the letter. So
that's pretty good. There's a real quick before we move on. There's an invite to his 30th birthday party, which if you remember back to Pirates of Silicon Valley, it was his birthday party depicted right at the end of the movie, right before they bounced him out of Apple.
Oh wow!
So there's an invite to that party here. Some fun stuff.
And they had a fun story with that. I guess like anything, if you were over 30, you were kind of like over the hill at Apple, and so they made that 30th birthday a big event for anybody that was crossing that threshold. And so like they threw parties. That's a very specific party, which I didn't know about. And
I never heard
depressing.
That. Carousel, the light in his hand turned colors and he gets heated to space. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's just blinking. Let's see. I want to actually talk about Floppy Disk Paradise.
Yes.
So it's these folks that had these different. They were basically helping attendees retrieve their data, right, off of magnetic media. And so you just bring in your disks and a thumb drive, and they would do whatever they could to try to get off, say like a cryoflux and all these other things. And then I think we also talked to them about spinning up old hard drives.
Yes, your strategy of kind of thunking the old hard drive to unstick anything that's stuck in there was validated by the experts. Although he was a lot more animated about it. He said he would take it in both hands and kind of like whack it on the side of the table.
Well, yeah, because the idea is that if the viscosity of the lubricant on the bearings gets too thick, then that physical jar is enough to release it so that the motor can spin it up at that point.
I felt this kind of went without saying, but he really stressed the second you get that hard drive spun up and can read data off of it, back everything up immediately.
Yeah, never turn it off again.
He's like, don't faff about, like, oh, I'm going to open that document and see what was in there or something. He was like DD that whole drive to a disk image as soon as you can, and then just never touch it again, because that's probably the only time it's ever going to work.
So I was going to ask, did they have a toolkit or something that they were using? Were they plugging these things into like Linux machines and just running DD on them, or were they using something more esoteric? Did you ask?
I didn't see what was running on his laptop, but he was helping somebody actually while we were talking with them to pull stuff off. And so I think it's actually like a variety of tools that they use depending on what they're trying to pull out. But yeah, there was like, hey, here's the image, and then here's the files we were able to pull out, right? And even if you didn't know what the format was.
That's
right?
really cool.
Yeah. Another aspect of this festival that I thought was neat, that this exhibit and at least one other one, there was also a live circuit board repair rejuvenation kind of thing going on. There was just kind of a community oriented aspect of the whole thing of like, hey, bring in your old floppies and we'll help you on the spot. Like this is data recovery is normally very expensive, but we'll just do it for you for free.
That's lovely. That's really
bring
cool.
in your old circuit boards. Yeah, it was neat.
I walked in there and the guy who was doing the circuit board repair had a Turbo Express opened up.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like, yeah, that makes sense because you always have to recap those. So, and then we commiserated on how horrible Game Gear caps were. And so it was good times.
Oh, that doesn't random aside. You were telling me about a factory sealed Game Gear.
Yeah, it's like graded factory sealed Game Gear, and I was like, that is just mush inside there.
There's like sludge inside of the actual Game Gear because the caps leaked so long ago.
yeah, they're notorious for being awful inside.
This is a real quick one. There wasn't a lot to do with this one, but the Monster 6502, which is a full scale like circuit, almost like breadboard style MOS 6502, which is a very classic CPU that ran the Apple II and a bajillion other devices.
But it's like big enough you can. It's like it's not like a microchip. It's like a full size.
Yes.
It's like a 2 foot by 2 foot board that you can see what's going on it. Kind of.
Sorry, I lack the vocabulary to describe this thing properly. But their pitch is this is a disintegrated circuit to make a complete working transistor scale replica of the 6502. And it's got a bunch of really cool lights on it that you can see blinking as it does stuff. But like it, as far as I can tell, it does function as a 6502.
That's crazy. Yeah. Somebody should make a huge Apple II to put that thing in. And then you have like a computer the size of a building.
It's funny you mention what did they call that gigantic Mac?
Big Mac.
The big.
Yeah.
I think I've got a little video of you typing on that thing. Like the keys are like almost the size of your hand, maybe.
Yeah,
wow.
It's made this gigantic Mac. And the funny thing was, Brad was like, oh, can you go type on it? And I immediately tried to put my hands on a keyboard like you would, but then my brain short circuited and like, wait a minute, I can't do that. These keys are enormous. And so
there's a version of the big scene with the floor piano,
right,
where you just get on the keys and you're jumping from key to key to type in your DOS command, your Apple commands.
Or play, Doom or something, maybe.
So. Can I ask about the Soviet computers? Because I saw this in the gallery of photos that you guys shared. There's this computer with what looks like Tetris running on a black and white screen.
Yeah, this was one of my top exhibits that I wanted to see going down on Saturday, and it turned out I think they had only been there on Friday. Is that right?
Yeah, so they unfortunately packed up their stuff on Friday night, but yeah, it was a bunch of like Soviet computers and most of them running Tetris, as you can imagine. But sure. the picture I posted, if you look at the arrow key configuration, it is just doesn't make any sense. It's just it's like function keys in the middle and all kinds of weird stuff. But in fact, I think in the swap meet room there was a microcomputer that had Cyrillic on it as well. So there was. It's just kind of like, okay, this is a Soviet era computer. It looks and feels like a Soviet era computer.
Like the space that's where the key that's where the backspace key is like kind of cattywampus. And it's worth mentioning there's like the arrow key configuration weirdness is impossible to overstate because it's got left, up, and right on one row. And then there's 3 function keys, F2, F3, F4. And then there's 2 down arrows next to each other inexplicably.
2 seemingly identical down arrows.
Yeah, but the pièce de résistance is the up and to the left key that is up and to the left of the up key. Like I don't understand.
There's only one diagonal and it's up and to the left.
Yeah, why the one diagonal?
This is very much like a put it in H situation from The Simpsons, right? Where like, what is happening with this keyboard?
I'm sure our Russian readers will write in and be like, oh yeah, no, that's just how Russian keyboards are. We always have an up and to the left.
Yep.
Looking at they have the list of computers they had there from the exhibit page, and it sounds like it's a lot of models that were sort of clones of other computers. Like there's a clone of the PDP-11, there's a clone of an Intel 8080, clone of the ZX Spectrum, an Apple I prototype board. So yeah, like a lot of kind of clones of familiar computers, it sounds like.
Yeah, which is not surprising. I mean, we see that even in the arcade world where it's just like, hey, here's the Russian knockoff of whatever was available, and so reverse engineered.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So we did talk about a couple times about the swap meet rooms. And so this is where the people who are obsessive collectors of things decide to unload things. And you just see it's basically like electronics flea market, which we went to kind of on steroids, because it is just like all kinds of super random, mostly computing parts. Right. So the things that I noted, so there's an SGI 1600 SW, which was an extremely expensive LCD monitor for the time. I want to say it was like $2,500 because it's like it's 16 by 9 LCD monitor with this like thing on the back that allows you to move it up and down. And it was $40. And so, but of course, it's a very proprietary connector. And I don't think people are looking at that. Yeah. And it only does like one resolution. Like nowadays, it's probably a $40 monitor, but it's just like seeing that and then remembering reading like PC World and talking about this revolutionary. I think even Anantech did a review of it. He's like, this is the most absurd monitor I've ever seen in my life. And it's just like sitting on this table next to like a tape drive or something.
1600 by 1024. It was not a 16 by 9.
Oh, okay.
It was a 16 by 10. Like all good monitors were back then.
Yes. So I posted a picture of this in the photos. There was a control panel for a Raytheon RDS 500. So this is once again big iron, and it's just full of buttons and switches and everything. And I was thinking of buying that and connecting it to Home Assistant so that I could do things in my house with it. And it's expensive. It was like $200 or something. So I'm like, oh, I'll kind of sleep on it. And then we went on Saturday. I was like, it's gone. And now I'm like, I should have bought the Raytheon like the control panel.
I remember you now talking about that Home Assistant idea. That's an amazing idea for this thing.
I mean, the good news is we're going to go to the swap meet, the flea market, and there will be something that is similar that has a bunch of buttons and lights on it, and the opportunity will rise again. It may not be the same panel, but there will be something you can do that with, Steve.
Yep.
Yeah. You know, tons of like e-machines, Power Macs. There was even some SGI stuff in there. Yep. The free stuff table was just the mishmash of everything. I saw like 2 8-track players in there, and so it's a real fun time for sure.
Dumping out their cable bin.
I think you might have mentioned the 8-inch floppy drive.
Yeah, there was. Oh, yeah, I didn't, but yeah, there was 8-inch floppy drive and floppies,
like straight up nuclear command and control style 8-inch floppies.
Apple IIIs. I think there were like a couple of Lisas in there, and so definitely this weird mix. My favorite thing was actually free. It was a picture. Someone had like stuck it to the wall, and I was like, "Do you have a PowerBook Duo? Do you like the movie Hackers? Take these screen accurate vinyl decals and make your laptop look like Acid Burn's laptop." And so it's like he just gave them away for free because he wanted to do it and share it with everybody else.
Yeah,
so
that was another one of those things that there was just a tiny bit of a vibe of like peace, love, and old computers at this thing. You know, people just very excited to share their passion for this stuff.
So I have to ask, where did you all leave your best in show chits? What did you vote for?
I had to go Prodigy Reloaded. I had to salute the unbelievable level of dedication and effort that guy is bringing to bear.
Yeah, so I did Apricot because I had previously voted for Prodigy and open source CRT. So
because in
previous years. So for me, it was like I just like the fact that this person collects very large, not so useful things and then hauls it all here so we can experience it.
Yeah. And he mentioned because it was a UK computer company, he has spent quite a bit of money on freight or whatever type of shipping he needs to use to get these large computers across the Atlantic Ocean.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick before we move on from the VCF, there was one other quick exhibits that I jotted in here at the last second. Mm-hmm. The consoles, the video game consoles as computers exhibit.
Oh yeah.
Remember that one?
Oh yeah.
Like they had a Famicom with I think it had to have a disk system, right, to run Family Basic, or
no, it actually
just a cartridge
tape drive. So it's a cartridge. There's a tape drive and a keyboard add-on. Ask me how I know.
So you can make it like a TI-99 4A is what you're saying, basically.
Yeah, ish, right. You can do, Family Basic was one of them, and there's a couple other things that you can do with it.
Yeah, I had no idea there were programming languages available on the classic Famicom, the Nintendo Entertainment System, for people who don't know. Did not have a Saturn. Saturn also had a version of BASIC. I found out recently they did not have that there.
They did have the floppy drive attachment though for the Saturn.
Did they? Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can save onto a floppy disk.
I have to ask you, what in the world is a Casio Loopy?
So Casio Loopy's, I think, a mid-90s console that has a sticker printer on it. So if you remember the kind of craze of the photo booths with the stickers, this was designed for that market. And so you could actually create sticker packs and then print them out. It would actually, like I said, there's a printer cartridge built into the unit in that like weird hump in the front. And so there's a lot of games related to that. You can also do capture and do screenshots of like VHS or TV things in there as well. And so it's a real funky machine. I think it was actually just recently added to MAME. And so,
wow.
It's either MAME or Mister. I can't remember, but there is definitely like, the ability to play some of the loopy stuff if you want.
It's got the weirdest controller I've seen in a long time, because it's got a normal D-pad and then it's got 4 buttons, but they're all in a row, like a Genesis, like a first run Genesis controller, except for instead of 3 buttons, there's 4. So that means it's clearly 1 button better than a Genesis.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. You got to add the extra buttons, but the Loopy is a funky system for sure.
Yeah. I was really hoping to see a PlayStation 2 or 3 running Linux there.
Could you run Linux on the 2 too?
Yes. They put out in fact, like I watched a YouTube video on this recently. It's like literally a PlayStation 2 looking case. Like it's a game case, like it's got the PlayStation 2 logo at the top, just like a PS2 game, but it's Linux on the cover and not a video game.
What's the logo for Linux? Was it like Slackware or something? What were they running on a PS2?
I don't know, actually.
It's probably
I'm not sure.
PlayStation Linux.
It might have been their own. It might have been their own distribution that they put together at that point.
I should put together like a greatest hits like game case for it.
Yes.
It's like, sold 1 million copies and now you can get it.
That's only $19. Perfect.
If I can shill our Discord very quickly, because this is the kind of Discord we have, a user in the Linux channel, like not 3 days ago, came on there showing off the PS3, his own custom distro he had put together to run on a PS3.
Oh, that's awesome.
With
that's
a modern
rad.
kernel, like up-to-date kernel and everything. Like really impressive stuff.
Yeah.
Very
the
cool.
TechPod Discord is a very fun place to hang out.
Yeah.
So I will shill as well.
Well,
So that's kind of that's kind of everything we had from the festival proper upstairs.
yeah, it's so we've talked about it before, but the Computer History Museum, if you're in the Bay Area ever for like a trip or whatever, is worth making the trip down to Mountain View for.
Oh, easily.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Everything from like the hand, I guess, is the Babbage engine still there? It was there the last time I was there, but I feel like that was a temporary loan.
I think
Maybe.
it's still there. So they like kind of walk you through the history of computing, and it's in that very first room that you walk into.
It's a giant mechanical computer that like they couldn't manufacture with the technology of the time. A few years ago, people assembled one in the Bay Area, and it was on display there all the way through. The complete it's the complete history. It's like you said, it starts from there. It starts from the beginning and works all the way up through the 80s and 90s and 2000s up to, I assume there's like iPhones and iPads and stuff there now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Modern game consoles, the whole shebang. We did kind of a quick run through there at the end of our day. I will say you could spend an entire day just in this museum, like Vintage Computer Festival notwithstanding, just the museum itself. There was an absolute ton of stuff to look at in there. If I could just very quickly rattle off some of the highlights for me that we saw in there. A chunk of ENIAC or ENIAC. I've never known is there an accepted pronunciation?
I always said ENIAC.
My grandmother said ENIAC. She worked for the DoD in the 50s
right,
on computers.
Yeah, she would
I
know.
don't think she worked on ENIAC, but she worked on the UNIVAC machines that followed.
EDVAC,
Right.
yeah.
I'm sure she was adjacent enough to it to know. Yes, they had a chunk of, is that kind of accepted as the first like big computer or close to it?
No, there was the bomb, and there's other things that were computers before that, but that was maybe the first programmable computer. I can't remember. I'm not a computer history guy.
Right. Yeah. There's something that is a first about it. Anyway, it was the size of a giant room, and they have a big chunk of that there. They also have an entire Cray there. I don't know what model it was, but it was It's basically the one from Sneakers with the bench seating coming off of it. I think it was like a 1975 model that they said at the time was the fastest computer in the world.
Yeah.
So that was cool to see.
And they had like some panels were clear so you could see inside, and you just like look at the wiring inside it, and it's just maddening. Like I can't imagine troubleshooting. It's like, oh, this tiny wire that's one of millions is like frayed or something.
Terrifying.
Was it
terrifying
black?
amount of wiring.
Is it the black one? That's the 1A. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the wiring loom inside is a nightmare. It looks like it whoever did that is a bad person. I'm just going to say I'm looking at it and I'm having horrible feelings inside right now.
Oh yeah, actually, I mean, like I said, I'll link all this stuff, but computerhistory.org has a bunch of pictures of some of their exhibits, and you can see this Cray right there with the god awful rat's nest of wires in there. They had a ton of hardware that we won't have to get into too much from the sort of 40s, 50s era of, hey, computers are useful in defense. We're going to start making a lot of automated stuff for, missile guidance, whatever. The reason that was notable to me, I took a picture of, there was a specific IBM console, and I think a lot of them had stuff like this. It had a rotary dial on it like a phone for one thing. Yeah. But the more interesting part to me was that it had an ashtray and a car-style cigarette lighter built right into the console.
That was probably an upsell, honestly. You think about it though. You think you're on the 24/7 watch, and you don't want the soldier whose finger's on the button to not be nicotined up, right?
Yeah.
It's
or you
really
don't want them taking smoke breaks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just smoke at the console. Why not? And it even had like the ashtray had like the little prongs to hold the cigarette, right? It's just okay. This is a different time.
Cigarettes are a very important part of 20th century history. It's
I was just picturing there were like so many guys in short white button-up shirts with ties and crew cuts smoking cigarettes at those consoles.
Yeah, or it was like uniform military guys, right?
Yeah, or that,
one or the other.
That. Yeah. In the area with the Cray, I kind of had to laugh at this. There was what they called the Intel personal supercomputer from 1985, the IPSC.
I've never heard of this one before.
It was a giant tower that had 128 286s in it.
Oh, wow.
Which I just had to laugh at. I don't know. I thought that was very amusing. Total speed of 2 megaflops.
That's a lot of megaflops for back then.
For 1985, sure.
Yeah.
The little card next to it described it as having 16 MW of memory, which I assume is like million words of memory. Because I think didn't they rate memory capacity in words at one time?
I don't remember that in the 286 era, but seeing this thing was just like, okay, how can we make the fastest things using like off the shelf CPUs, and let's just shove 128 of these in there.
Yeah.
Well, back then that would have been a kind of ridiculous thing to do, and then it very quickly became just the way supercomputers worked.
Right.
Yeah.
Steve, you pointed out this Neiman Marcus Honeywell kitchen computer.
Yeah. I mean, this is very much like the not too distant future Jetsons thing, where it was a computer that had a business function, but then they also had it in the Neiman Marcus catalog geared towards consumers. And you kind of see it's this swooping shape, but it has a built-in cutting board on the front. But its display is just lights. So they're like, oh, you can put like recipes in here. It's like, well, what does like on, off mean? Right. And so
dash of salt.
Yeah. And so it was just like this really weird thing. And it even says in the display, they didn't actually sell any of them to consumers, but it was marketed and you could actually pick it up. And as part of the purchase price, which I think was like $10,000 at the time, it actually came with free programming classes. So you could, buy this, computer for your kitchen that looks amazing. And that's what I should have run out of the museum with and put that in my kitchen. So
you just need a teletype to get the recipes out. That's clearly the solution for this problem.
Yeah, of course. Teletype in the kitchen makes sense.
This is just a tiny sample of, there are hundreds of exhibits in the Computer History Museum proper. They had an entire intact CPU wafer you could see, which was a bunch of Itanium CPUs, which I had to laugh at because that was famously Intel's failed architecture that nobody bought outside of like business customers who were committed to it.
I think everybody has the same reaction when they see their wafer of Itaniums at the Computer History Museum, which is, oh yeah, of course Intel gave them a failed Itanium wafer.
Yep.
They were using Frisbees.
Yes. They had the very first, like the legendary Pong prototype machine from Andy Caps in, where was that in the South Bay?
In Sunnyvale. Yeah.
Sunnyvale.
And so he has the coin box on the side, and it's the thing that kind of kicked it all off. And it's kind of a skew, right? It's very clearly like a one-off. But that's the thing that launched the industry. So it was very cool to see. Well, not launch, I guess Computer Space was before that. But
yes, for sure.
Yeah.
They had like more SGI workstations and stuff. They had an 80s era Pixar workstation, which I can't believe I forgot to take a picture of. It was huge. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was that like
it was this giant
like
cube.
3 or 4
like this,
square foot box?
Yeah. And it had like this, like almost like stone facade that said Pixar on the front. And so we were kind of curious what hardware was sitting in there.
Yeah. They didn't say. I guess that was way, it was 10 years before Toy Story. That was in the, what's the little lamp mascot?
Luxo.
Luxo. It was like in that era, which was cool to see. They have a bunch of the Xerox Parks. So like the Xerox Alto, which is the machine that came out of the Palo Alto Research Center that led to the GUI and the mouse and Ethernet and all that stuff.
Yeah.
They also have the Utah teapot there if you're interested in 3D graphics. It's just cool. A white teapot. It looks like a normal teapot, but it's the one that he used that Martin Newell used to do the first one of the early 3-dimensional graphics for benchmarking purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, just amazing artifacts, right? And the fact that it's the companies were coming out of, here, right out of the Bay Area, and fortunately thought to preserve some of these things and have the resources. So
it's really cool.
Yeah, they have that mouse from Xerox Park.
Oh, the wooden mouse?
Made out of wood. It was made out of wood, and you can see the 2 rollers are just like little wheels underneath.
Yep.
Yep. A lot of cool stuff.
It's there. It's worth going to. It's Computer History Museum. So they do this every year, the Vintage Computer Festival, right? This is an annual event.
Well, like I said, they do a lot of them actually. So there's, it seems like on their website they maybe remove the events as they happen. So I can't see what's happened this year prior to the Bay Area one. But like I said, there's one coming up in Chicago like soon, like September 7th. I want to say. I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, and I've seen coverage of those shows. I would recommend, if what we're talking about seems interesting to you, I think that this show would definitely be interesting to you. And each of them has their own flavor, right? Like, obviously, they all can't be held in the Computer History Museum, and there's different slants, but you still have that enthusiasm, right? And like, I think I saw one of them from one of the East Coast shows. It was a guy who collected a bunch of like those Acer Aspires, right? And you're like, why would you do that? It's like, well, it was a really interesting, it was like frog design, and they were kind of doing a bunch of stuff. And so here's what that experience is like. So if anything, you're going to be hanging out with a bunch of fellow nerds who are equally, if not more passionate than you are about stuff.
Let's see. I have found a list. Let's see. They do it in New Jersey. They do it in Southern California. I'm not sure where. There's one in Dallas. There is one, like I said, in Atlanta. There's the one coming up in Chicago. So yeah, it's again, I'll link all this stuff, vcfed.org for this organization that has all that information.
Cool. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming by and talking about old computers with us. This has been a blast having you on.
Thank you. Your expertise is invaluable in talking about this stuff.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always been it's a pleasure, and I always like sharing events like this, and hopefully you get more people to attend. And Brad, if you want to start doing your PlayStation 3 Linux display for next year, you can start right now. We start putting together a table for you. From
attendee to exhibitor in 1 year.
Yeah.
That might be doable.
You can do it. Speed run. It's fine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Steve, where can people find you if they want to find out more about what you're up to? You're busy on preservation.
Yeah. So the Video Game History Foundation is gamehistory.org. And you can find me on Blue Sky under Steve Lin. And I post stuff, including the sidewalk TV that I just repaired. So you can see the whole process of getting that working.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And we appreciate you coming by. Thanks, Steve.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Steve Lin for coming by. You can find Steve at the Video Game History Foundation, and where all people have questions about old computers and old video games. Brad, it's the time of the show when we talk about the listener-supported nature of Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod.
It's a listener-supported podcast, I understand.
Yeah, 100% listener-supported. We would not be here without the support of generous listeners just like you. If you would like to find out how you can support the Tech Pod, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod. And for as little as $5 a month, you gain access to the fabulous Tech Pod Discord, where people talk about Brad's cheese predilections all day long, around the clock, 24/7.
Hey, look, everybody's got their own cheese predilections, okay?
People were really upset about your dislike of American cheese. They wasn't angry, but they were disconcerted by it. They were
Maybe this is selection bias, but I thought it was about 50-50 for and against.
I mean, look, I was shocked that anyone cared about American cheese that much, but here we are. But yeah, you can gain access to the Discord. You get access to the monthly patron exclusive episodes, and just join a lovely community of nerds that are just like you. And highly recommend it. Yeah. So you can go to patreon.com/techpod for that. Look, there's some drama in the world of Patreon this week. I don't know. People are probably paying attention. Some people aren't. There's new charges coming if you subscribe through the iOS app in November, whether we want them or not. We're looking at some other alternatives as a result of that, but the Patreon will run for the foreseeable future. So
yes, I think we can say pretty confidently, do not support us or anybody else on Patreon through iOS, because you will pay 30% more to do so.
Well, if you open Safari and go to patreon.com and then type TechPod and don't click open the app, then you're fine.
Yes. To be clear,
it's only in the app. Yes. It's very stupid.
The iOS app in particular. Yes.
Yeah. It's the thing Tim Epic was complaining about Fortnite over the last few years. And it's the kind of thing I would have thought that they would have stopped doing because it's costing them a lot of money. But what do I know? Anyway, that's it on that front. As always, we want to thank all of our listeners for supporting the show. But we want to give an extra special thank you to our executive producer tier patrons, including Andrew Slosky, Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Fiend Can't Teach You How to Ride a Bike. It's good because I already know how to ride a bike. Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you also so much.
Yes, thank you.
And I guess on that note, we will go back to our modern computers, our computers of the current era, without any diagonal up and to the left keys or weird LCD screens.
Cardinal directions only here in the 21st century.
Yep, our personal computers, our apples, no apricots here, just doing normal computer stuff. And we will be back next week with another edition of the Tech Pod. Thank you all so much, and we will see you then. Bye, everybody.